Well, for more on the smartphone industry, I'm joined by Paul Swenson, Managing Director of investment firm, the China Hand Consulting. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rachelle. It's great to be here this evening.
Now, as we heard there, BlackBerry said it's shifting away from its signature phones to focus on software and security services. And some even predict that BlackBerry will have a 0% share of the OS market in the next 4 years. What are your thoughts on BlackBerry's moves?
One of the issues with the smartphone industry typically has been that the moves have all been incremental. And so BlackBerry's move in this regard is actually, for them, probably a step forward because they're able to move to software, which we haven't seen in phones before.
Now, another company making headlines, but not for the right reasons, is Samsung and its issue with the battery recall. How long do you think it will take for the company to recover from the backlash of the battery recall?
At least for the consumers in China, the 12-day wait for the recall and then the assurances that Samsung was using a different battery only for the China market has really distressed a lot of Chinese citizens. 36% of Samsung users have said they're going to switch to Apple, and another 25% have said they're going to switch to the Huawei phones.
Now, this is actually coming at a time when global growth of smartphone sales is slowing and the market is still getting more and more mature. So did Samsung handle the battery situation the right way, and did it happen quickly enough?
It definitely didn't happen quickly enough, and applying the smartphone recall to all of its consumers worldwide would have provided them with a lot more assurance. And a continuing issue tends to be that Samsung doesn't have the capacity to change its batteries within the stores, which means those phones have to go out, and often the customers are without their phones for a week to 2 weeks.
So you're saying, did it really do a number then in terms of the company's credibility in the way it handled this?
Certainly in China, I believe that's the case.
Now, let's also look at some of the fastest growing smartphone markets in terms of manufacturers and consumers. We're seeing big growth, especially in emerging markets. So let's start with China's role in that growth. What are your thoughts on that?
China has been a really interesting market through the first 2 quarters of 2016. We've seen some growth from Huawei, but we've seen really astounding growth from the next 2 players, neither of which most US consumers will have heard of, Oppo and Vivo. And Oppo had 125% year-on-year growth, and Vivo had nearly 75% growth. At the same time, traditional player Xiaomi was losing ground, and Apple was losing ground in the first 2 quarters as well. But we do expect a recovery there with the release of the iPhone 7 in the 3rd quarter.
Now, we're also seeing a growing role from India. How could that country shape the global smartphone market?
India as well is very interesting because it was only 2015 when the 4G LTE towers started to cover the country. And so you only had about 95 million users that were on the 4G networks. And now you have a growth rate of over 30% a year for the 4G smartphone users. And so that's a tremendous opportunity for most global players.
And just lastly, Paul, we've obviously come a long way since Apple launched its first iPhone, and there now seems to be this sense that there's really not that much difference between smartphones, and that fast pace of innovation seems to be slowing. What do you think it's going to take to really get customers excited about smartphones again?
It's going to take another generational move. In China, in particular, many consumers use their smartphones for e-commerce. 71% of all purchases are done on smartphones. And so I think that the consumers are really looking for better ways to shop and more convenient lifestyle choices. The watches solved part of that issue, but didn't quite get there for the mobility. So it'll be interesting to see what they can come up with for the next generational move.
Well, certainly lots of competition. We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately. Paul Swenson, Managing Director of the China Hand Consulting.